Despite becoming somewhat of a meme in recent history due to sequences of admittedly hilarious acting or irony featured within the iconic 2000 movie, both the American Psycho film directed by Mary Harron and novel written by Bret Easton Ellis are quite the disturbing piece, and an excellent example of dystopian psychological horror, detailing the life of 27-year-old investment banker Patrick Bateman. Upon first glance, Patrick seems to be knowledgeable, charismatic, and an even deeply socially conscious man, invested in the well-being of the world around him, referred to by colleagues as the voice of reason and the boy next door. But as the story progresses, we learn more about how both he himself, as well as the world he inhabits, are working in tandem to paint a vivid yet inconclusive image of a truly malevolent entity. We don't have much of a background on Patrick aside from him being born into wealth and hardly ever working at all due to his family's position within the company he's employed under, essentially owning it. But outside of how financially well-to-do he and those around him are, he's still made to seem relatable to the audience through his daily routine as well as his various hobbies, having a deep love and appreciation for music, regularly attending outings with family, friends, and colleagues, or venturing to his office for work every day. Originating in mid to late 1980s Manhattan during the initial rise of Wall Street, American Psycho is drenched in references to all sorts of different designer fashion and elaborate meals at expensive restaurants that may seem like a foreign concept to us today, with Patrick indulging in this shallow materialism and consumerism-centric way of life. And although he becomes accustomed to this lifestyle and expresses a desire to fit into his fiancée Evelyn, there are points in the film and novel where he inwardly or outwardly expresses a disdain or detachment from human emotion and the world around him. I have all the characteristics of a human being: blood, flesh, skin, hair, but not a single clear, identifiable emotion except for greed and disgust. There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity, something illusory. And though I can hide my cold gaze and you can shake my hand and feel flesh gripping yours, and maybe you can even sense that our lifestyles are probably comparable, I simply am not there. It is hard for me to make sense on any given level. Myself is fabricated, an aberration. I am a non-contingent human being. My personality is sketchy and unformed. My heartlessness goes deep and is persistent. My conscience, my pity, my hopes disappeared a long time ago, probably at Harvard if they ever did exist. These inner monologues present in the film, but more so in the novel due to how much more time is spent inside of Patrick's mind, provide a few hints or details about how his life could have taken the turn it did. Perhaps he did lose sight of himself somewhere along his path attending Harvard, or his inner depravity could have spawned much earlier, as he offhandedly mentions how he forced himself on one of his family's maids at just 14 years of age. He himself may not even know. As he says in his monologue, there is only an idea of himself, some kind of abstraction, something illusory, and therefore he himself or we will never know what brought him to this point of shallow existence, as he is an empty void of a human being, carrying with it no empathy or emotion for others, as does everyone in the same position as he. Enraptured in all-consuming materialism, they are oblivious to the world around them. This is evident in the way that Patrick suffers no consequence for saying the horrific things he does to people in front of their faces, or how everyone is constantly mistaking each other for someone else. In a world where everyone is the same, everyone is wealthy, and everyone partakes in the same shallow lifestyle, deep down Patrick knows he is not his own individual, and more than likely had his entire life planned out for him before he even left his mother's womb. This emptying revelation within himself manifests in various ways, one being a beyond naturally competitive and otherworldly lust to be the best among his peers, nearly breaking out into a cold sweat and tears at the idea someone's business card may be better than his own, taking visible offense when a woman of the night compliments Paul Allen's apartment, and being dead set on using Paul's limousine to ride out into the night with Evelyn. Even when violence is removed from the equation entirely, Patrick still shows a disregard for and enjoys tormenting others, as demonstrated when he has Evelyn eat a urinal cake covered in chocolate before breaking up with her in a public restaurant, and when he forces his ex-girlfriend Bethany to audibly read a poem written by him rife with slurs in a public place as well, drawing looks of ire towards her. Violence, however, is more than likely something else entirely. As I've mentioned, we do not and more than likely will not ever know how his murders began or definitively why he commits them. However, I believe it correlates back to his perception of himself as an empty person. Patrick has admitted on occasion to feeling something through his murders, or potentially a connection to his victims, through being the last one to gaze upon their visage in their most vulnerable moment as he ends their lives. I want her to watch what I'm going to do to Tori, and she's propped up in a way that makes this unavoidable. As usual, in an attempt to understand these girls, I'm filming their deaths. Though I am satisfied at first by my actions, I'm suddenly jolted with a mournful despair at how useless, how extraordinarily painless it is to take a child's life. This thing before me, small and twisted and bloody, has no real history, no worthwhile past. Nothing is really lost. It's so much worse and more pleasurable taking the life of someone who has hit his or her prime, who has the beginnings of a full history, a spouse, a network of friends, a career, whose death will upset far more people whose capacity for grief is limitless than a child's would, perhaps ruin many more lives than just the meaningless, puny death of this boy. One criticism you may have heard regarding the original novel written by Bret Easton Ellis is that it can be quite tedious or drag on at several points due to Patrick's never-ending droning about monotonous, trivial characteristics regarding his day, like the features of a Walkman he is using or what the people around him are wearing, even if he disapproves. These same seemingly eternal descriptions are also given to the details of his horrific murders and scenes of torture, which I will obviously spare you the contents of here, but I believe that these very brief windows we have into how he feels about his murders, as well as how thorough he is in describing them, provide a crucial piece of information in determining why Patrick does the things he does. And that is that Patrick likely commits these murders in an attempt to feel some sort of emotion or connection to humanity, or potentially to reassert the notion that he is above these people to himself by being the one to end their lives. This contempt is apparent both in Patrick's killing or even blinding of unhoused beggars throughout New York, as well as his unending hatred for nearly all women, viewing them as vapid or unintelligent. But to go more into detail about my initial assertion, since the world around Patrick and the people in it hold no authentic emotion, no individuality, and no true intimate connections, it's likely Patrick views the time he spends with his victims after, during, or even potentially before their deaths as the only moments of true, deep, personal, or emotional connection. The reason I say this is because, for one, he'll describe vividly and with great care the contorted faces his victims make upon realizing their fate, or looks of agony as he is torturing them, as if these details are something he values and wants to remember, similarly to the meals he consumes and the clothes he is wearing. Also being supported by the fact that he creates tapes of these murders, at one point attempts to share a meal with the long dead body of one of his victims, and even attempts to recreate his crimes through crude drawings. Second reason, however, being that apart from Paul Allen, Elizabeth, or potentially his ex-girlfriend Bethany, none of Patrick's victims partake in the same lifestyle that he and his acquaintances do, usually being an escort or whatever woman Patrick has settled on having intercourse with for the night, accompanied by various citizens unfortunate enough to run across his path, some of which include a delivery boy, a custodian, various animals, or even children. I'd attribute Patrick's murders of Bethany and Elizabeth more so to his deep disdain for women, but the fact that he is either knowingly or subconsciously seeking out those who couldn't be any more different than himself to spend what he likely views as deeply human vulnerable moments with means that he is intrinsically unfulfilled, detached from his day-to-day life and the people surrounding him throughout it. This notion proves to be true with how he often questions or creates conversations with his victims, as though he has a genuine interest in their story, or as he said earlier, in an attempt to understand them. This is in contrast with how often he is dismissive of or uninterested in those around him or who live similarly to him, claiming that Timothy Bryce is the only interesting person he knows. Perhaps you could argue he chooses his victims far away from himself out of a desire to not be caught, but that's if you believe any of Patrick's murders to be rooted in genuine reality. Regardless of any rhyme, reason, or rationale that could hope to be discerned from his actions, Patrick is undoubtedly a deeply depraved, sick man, and he acknowledges this in a voicemail confession that he leaves for his lawyer. Howard, it's Bateman, Patrick Bateman. You're my lawyer, so I think you should know I've killed a lot of people. I killed Paul Allen with an axe in the face, and his body is dissolving in a bathtub in Hell's Kitchen. I don't want to leave anything out here. I guess I've killed maybe 20 people, maybe 40. I have tapes of a lot of it. Some of the girls have seen the tapes. I ate some of their brains, and I tried to cook a little. Tonight, I just had to kill a lot of people, and I'm not sure I'm going to get away with it this time. I guess I'm a pretty sick guy. However, not only is Patrick sick in the fact that he is indeed a monstrous psychopath, but he may also suffer from some other mental malady with fits of bizarre delusions. There are several instances throughout both the novel and the film that convey the verisimilitude of Patrick's crimes as questionable, or the detailing of which in the novel that paint Patrick as an unreliable narrator. One example of which being when he gets into an intense shootout against the police and suddenly begins to narrate in the third person, or when he perceives an ATM commanding him to feed it a stray cat. This could mean that some, if not all, of Patrick's murders are a product of his deluded, violent mind and hold no actual basis in reality. There are instances where it is hinted that someone, somewhere knows what he has done, being when he speaks to the realtor at Paul Allen's apartment, or in one of the more unnerving sections in the novel where he is confronted by a taxi driver and called out as a murderer directly to his face. "Hey, don't I know you?" he asks in a thick, barely penetrable accent. "I'm in a movie. I'm an actor," I tell him. "A model." "Nah, that's not it," he says grimly. There's a long, scary pause while he stares at me in the rearview mirror, and the grim smile fades. His face is blank. He says, "I know, man. I know who you are." And he's nodding, his mouth drawn tight. The radio that was tuned into the news is shut off. Buildings pass by in a gray-red blur. The cab passes other cabs. The sky changes color from blue to purple to black and back to blue. At another light, a red one, he races straight through. I almost interrupt the driver, tell him to pull over, have him let me out, let him keep the change from a 10, no, a 20, but I can't move because he's driving too fast, and something intervenes, something unthinkable and ludicrous, and I hear him say it, maybe. You're the guy who kills Solly. As with everything else, the following happens very quickly, though it feels like an endurance test. Man, your face is on a wanted poster downtown, he says, unflinching. I think I would like to stop here, I manage to croak out. These wholly uncomfortable sequences are then followed up with contradicting accounts of what has occurred after the murder of Paul Allen and Detective Donald Kimball's subsequent search for him. Someone I talked to through my lawyer tells me that Donald Kimball, the private investigator, has heard that Paul Allen really is in London, that someone spotted him twice. Wait, stop, I exclaim, looking into Carnes' face, making sure he's listening. You don't seem to understand. I did it, Carnes. I chopped Allen's head off. I tortured dozens of girls. That whole message I left on your answering machine was true. I'm drained. I'm not appearing calm, wondering why this doesn't feel like a blessing to me. Excuse me, he says, trying to ignore my outburst. I really must be going. No, I protest. Now, Carnes, listen to me. Listen very, very carefully. I killed Paul Allen, and I liked it. I can't make myself any clearer. But that's simply not possible, he says, brushing me off, and I'm not finding this amusing anymore. It never was supposed to be, I bellow. And then why isn't it possible? It's just not, he says, eyeing me worriedly. Why not? I shout again over the music, and though there's really no need to, adding, you stupid bastard. He stares at me as if we are both underwater, and says very clearly over the din of the club, because I had dinner with Paul Allen, twice in London, just 10 days ago. After we stare at each other for what seems like a minute, I finally have the nerve to say something back to him, but my voice lacks any authority, and I'm not sure if I believe myself when I tell him simply, no, you didn't. But it comes out as a question, not a statement. This is where you'll discover that American Psycho finds its strides as a horror story. We will never know a true Patrick, and there likely isn't one to ever uncover, as he is a walking contradiction. He takes an obsessive concern with his appearance and his health, yet debases himself by consuming drugs nearly every night. He preaches to Preston for making a racist joke and tells McDermott to cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks, yet he only refers to the black people he encounters throughout the story with slurs. He perceives himself as above his peers, the people living exactly like himself, yet constantly seeks validation from these people or for different ways to one-up them. Not only this, but the reality behind his crimes will always be ambiguous. In a world where no one can look beyond themselves or their possessions, no one can tell or cares to tell if Patrick is genuinely the depraved maniac hiding among them that he at points claims to be, outright confessing on numerous occasions to no repercussion. If his crimes are in fact real, then the only ones who can recognize this are those far enough removed from materialism and greed that they can see Patrick for who he is and what he has done, but he will face no true hindrance or consequence, because everyone looks the same, dines at the same restaurants, and wears the same clothes. Subtly illustrated when in the final moments of the film, Patrick is distressed that Carnes does not understand him, and desperately asks, "Don't you know who I am? I'm not Davis, I'm Patrick Bateman. We talk on the phone all the time. Don't you recognize me? You're my lawyer." The camera then promptly cuts to everyone wearing the same suit and tie, smoking the same cigars and drinking the same alcohol. As no one is truly their own discernible individual who can look beyond themselves, there is no one to hold Patrick accountable for the horrific things he has done, even if deep down at points he feels guilty and desires to be punished. There are no more barriers to cross. All I have in common with the uncontrollable and the insane, the vicious and the evil, all the mayhem I have caused in my utter indifference toward it, I have now surpassed. I still, though, hold on to one single bleak truth. No one is safe. Nothing is redeemed. Yet I am blameless. Each model of human behavior must be assumed to have some validity. Is evil something you are, or is it something you do? My pain is constant and sharp, and I do not hope for a better world for anyone. In fact, I want my pain to be inflicted on others. I want no one to escape, but even after admitting this, and I have countless times, in just about every act I've committed in coming face to face with these truths, there is no catharsis. I gain no deeper knowledge about myself. No new understanding can be extracted from my telling. There has been no reason for me to tell you any of this. This confession has meant nothing. This in and of itself is quite bleak to say the least, but alternatively, if his crimes are vivid fabrications, potentially with those who confront him on them as well, then Patrick's fragile psyche is beginning to muddle reality with fantasy, and the two are merging into each other precisely the way that everyone around Patrick does. I believe the truth regarding Patrick's crimes is best left to mystery. Not only is it fitting considering the inability to distinguish reality from fantasy coinciding with the lack of any discernibility between himself and the people we meet throughout the film and the novel, as they are constantly mistaking each other for others. But in either interpretation, it is truly horrifying to think that a monster like Patrick is walking among them, a deluded beast trapped inside of the prison of its own mind, with no escape in sight, hidden behind a charming, boyish demeanor. As Bret Easton Ellis once remarked, the inception of Patrick came from a point in his own life where he was living in his own alienation and isolation from the world around him. And few horrors that can be written by the pen or captured on screen can truly disturb like the horrors that can be conjured by the human mind when left to its own devices. This is not an exit, and happy Halloween. If you are interested in other videos where I explore the horror genre, feel free to check out other videos on my channel's horror playlist or suggest topics for me to cover in the comments below. Subscribe for free to be notified of my future projects like when I upload or stream. Like the video to support the channel and myself, as well as let me know that this is the type of content you want to see. Thank you all for watching.